Titan sub may never be retrieved. Is this a foreboding and ominous warning about what happens when that which is at depth is brought back to the surface, even in our imagination? Or is it just a distraction from all the corruption? Hello there, you 6.4 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on this voyage to the depths where we try to recover the emblems of the past, where we investigate what was lost and try to find what truths lay there at the still, deep miles beneath the terrain upon which we usually walk. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe. Remember, we make this content every day and we want you to see all of it. I'm fascinated by the Titan sub story for these reasons. If indeed there is a collective consciousness that we all participate in, what does it mean when there is a renewed interest in the Titanic? The Titanic, of course, represented the zenith of industrial achievement at the time that it was built.
The largest moving object ever made by the hand of man in all history.
It's been a news story at the time it was launched. It was a news story when it sunk. It was a news story when the Titanic movie became one of the biggest cultural artifacts of the time. And now the Titanic is back in the collective imagination because of new technology that allows us to make 3D models and technology that evidently does not allow us to go thousands and thousands of fathoms deep to investigate. Why, once again, is it billionaires and economic achievement that is defining our culture and defining our age? What does it mean when at this time of universal chaos, UFOs, billionaires fighting one another, new, peculiar, mysterious wars? What does it mean when we go down to the depths and try to bring up the past? What does it tell us that billionaires are able to go on expeditions that are, let's face it, indulgent, and I mean that with all due respect to those that have lost their lives, when there is so much poverty elsewhere? Is there a kind of unconscious meaning that can be gleaned from this extraordinary story?
New details coming in about the investigation into the Titan sub disaster, the Canadian ship that launched the doomed vessel returning to port in Newfoundland with flags at half-mast. OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush among the 5 people killed in the catastrophic implosion.
Human beings have always had an aspect of our shared culture that's about intrepid investigation. Down into the very depths of the sea, where potentially extraterrestrials lurk, we now learn. Out into the outer reaches of space, the highest mountain peaks. It used to be how we defined our culture, through excellence, expertise, and shared intrepid adventure. Now, of course, this is the preserve of a particular economic class. The idea that together we're going to explore space is ridiculous, because our whole culture is undergirded by economic models that require hierarchies and privilege and seem to me to be marching relentlessly towards a state where there is centralized power and the rest of us become somewhere between an automaton and a blob, constantly engaged by our tech, expressing ourselves through consuming no meaningful democratic power or communal power at all. The reason this story interests me is because of the narrative of the Titanic. At its time, it represented power. It now represents intrigue. And those that have gone down out of hubris and curiosity to investigate it, a luxury and a privilege, they have curiously been claimed by it, added to those that died at the time. What is it that the Titanic represents in the ongoing myth of our culture? What is this great sepulchre that lays at the deep, this tomb, this ongoing tomb that seems to be denying even contemporary experts from investigating it further? I'm not saying that this is a rationally accurate analysis. I'm saying that this is what can be mythically drawn from it. Loads of you watching this now think, I don't care what happens to a bunch of billionaires that can just afford to pay 250 grand to go and explore the deep. Loads of you I know, let me know in the chat in the comments, will be saying this is just a distraction from important stuff that's going on with the Biden administration, the charge to Hunter Biden. And potentially those things are true as well. But surely you've noticed that our global culture seems to be extraordinary. Isn't this story part of an odd new collection, a new menagerie of mad stories about exploration, weird cage fights, peculiar wars, UFOs? Have you looked at the raft of stories that are being released lately? Is it possible that something seismic just below the surface is taking place?
All 5 passengers on board instantly killed in a catastrophic implosion. Authorities also hoping to recover audio recordings. They say investigations typically take anywhere from 18 months to 2 years.
I mean, it's odd because now there's got to be another set of investigations into an extraordinary extraordinary event that wasn't really meant to yield anything other than pleasure. It's a pleasure expedition, isn't it? It's just a sort of subaquatic brothel of the mind that's being visited. And now, more expenditure, more time. In a way, this is the perfect story that shows you how, even though we're living in an increasingly globalist culture, it's defined by very peculiarly diverse and varied interests. Where you might have one part of the earth defined by famine and poverty, where you might find that your democracy is falling apart, that you don't have any meaningful political alternatives because both of the dominant parties are basically the same. While you're not invited to vote on whether you're going to be locked down in a pandemic or whether a new war should be embarked on, or whether gain-of-function research should happen, or whether or not you think it's wise to engage China in a war, the eyes of the world are on this. The resources of the world are on this. Isn't it an interesting diagnostic tool that tells us that there is something wrong under the depths? In dream analysis, the ocean represents the unconscious. Something like the Titanic, a vessel that we're all aware of, represents some kind of grail, some kind of quest, something that we're all looking for. And really, what's a more important pursuit? Going down to explore the Titanic out of mere curiosity, or coming up with new and radical solutions for how we might live together as a culture when it appears that there are social, ecological, political, economic, militaristic disasters on the horizon in almost every direction in an unprecedented way? I know you would have progressives say, no. Why, 80 years ago it was the Second World War, and hundreds of years ago people used to live outside, sucking on a pig's teat to survive. I recognise there are aspects of civilised culture that are extremely beneficial, but clearly we're still looking for something, and we're not going to find it at the bottom of the sea.
Now, the world of exploration takes a breath as difficult decisions remain about a potential recovery mission to the bottom of the Atlantic, a place known for tragedy, now fresh for 5 more families.
And I suppose that's the brutal truth. There are 5 families now grieving needlessly because of this expedition. Let's have a look at some analysis from elsewhere. First of all, certain painful but telling historical ironies come to mind. There are similarities now played out on a miniature scale between the sinking of the original RMS Titanic and its present-day shadow, the Titan. There were prominent wealthy victims of the 1912 disaster too, including John Jacob Astor IV, business magnate and the richest individual aboard the doomed ship, and Pennsylvania Railroad executive John Thayer. This time, like the time when the Titanic was launched and sank, is a time that's in a way defined by a sense that we're at the periphery of new exploration. At that point, industry had brought about great miraculous ventures like the Titanic herself. Now we stand on the brink of AI. And similarly, perhaps we have new warnings because the Titanic went down just before the First World War, quickly followed by the Second World War. Now we stand on the precipice of all this potentially new and miraculous technology. But many of us, and let me know if you agree with this in the comments, sense that there is a foreboding, an eeriness to our time, a weirdness, a strangeness that suggests that we need to awaken from a kind of peculiar illusion. And imagine what was heralded by the sinking of the Titanic. Imagine if we could have stepped back from that time and said, all of this industry, all of this exploration, all of this ambition is going to lead to massive conflagration and the loss of millions of lives in those 2 world wars across Europe, across the entire world, of course. Are we similarly now at an axis point where we need to step back and take a review of the direction we're heading in? The 1912 sinking and enormous death toll, as various investigations have shown, were entirely avoidable. They were the combined product of corporate profit hunger, ill-conceived plans, countless errors, and simple stupidity. Likewise, there seems reason to believe that OceanGate's activities merit scrutiny. We can't fund these trips to the bottom of the ocean without your money, and I've got to get down there and see what the hell's going on. Where's that necklace that they... I want that bloody thing back. That's why I need you to come with me on a trip to the... No, just we've got a sponsor now, and they're a bloody good sponsor, and you're going to love them. Stay to the end, I'll make it funny. There are more and more data breaches every effing day. And just last week, millions of people in Louisiana and Oregon, which are places, had their personal data stolen in a massive cyber attack. It sickens me. And if your personal information ever finds its way into the grubby little hands of data brokers, they can sell it on and get this, make some serious cash at your expense while you're at home, asleep in your bed, or perhaps feeding a child. But fear not, because those digital do-gooders at Incogni are on your side. Phew! They'll delete your data from the records of those unscrupulous data broker bastards and make sure they can't source your details ever again. Create an account with Incogni by clicking in the link in the description description below, give Incogni permission to remove your data from those bastard broker databases' filthy grubby hands. Sit back and wait to be notified about all the brokers and email lists you've been removed from. It's going to be a thrill, and it really is that easy. Boop, boop, beep, doo. And there's even more good news, because the first 100 people, get ready, steady, that go to my link, steady, incogni.com/brand, will receive 60% off with Incogni. You're welcome! Now let's get back to the other version of me telling you something that's going to rock your little world. In 2018, the company's director of marine operations, David Lockridge, presented what's described in the media as a scathing quality control report to senior management, including CEO Stockton Rush, and was fired for his efforts. Lockridge prefaced his report by insisting that it was time to properly address items that may pose a safety risk to personnel and that numerous issues posed serious safety concerns. And there are the appalling matters involving the rescue efforts. Famously, the Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, able in theory to accommodate 1,778 people, a little over half the 2,200 people on board, and many of those put to sea only half filled. You know all those guys dancing downstairs? Yeah? Well, fuck them! Even if the submersible Titan had been located, efforts to save lives would have been hindered by the fact that virtually no rescuing capabilities presently exist, at least in government hands. A Forbes comment points out astonishingly that as the global market for extreme tourist adventures has emerged, submarine rescue has now become a largely privatized endeavor, and most governments have little to offer the missing mariners if they are trapped underwater. The decline in America's rescue capabilities has been dramatic. In 1960, the US Navy boasted 9 dedicated submarine rescue ships and 2 fleet tugs fitted out for undersea rescue work. Today, the service lacks a single dedicated undersea rescue vessel. Once the pursuit of space travel and moon missions captivated the attention of the globe. Now, it is the private enterprise of billionaires like Bezos that take us to the moon. Figures like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg have now in the public imagination replaced figures that seemed before to represent a nation. Perhaps one thing this alludes to is we may still have national pride and a connection to our flags and our nations, but increasingly, there is nothing behind it. When it comes to it, private enterprise has come in and taken away the power that would once have been the source of a nation's pride. Think even and significantly of military spending in the country of the United States of America. We know, of course, that 50% of it goes straight to private companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, etc., and that the Pentagon, once the home of the American military, can't even pass an audit. That there's extraordinary anomalies in their accountancy and expenditure. Sometimes I wonder if this new entrepreneurial, intrepid spirit of endeavour is an indication that the age of the nation is over. Let me know if you agree in the comments. Once again, America's vast military, security and anti-terror apparatus only proves capable of ending lives, not saving them. That's an interesting diagnosis, and it shows us where we stand. There is the capacity to expand through war, but there is not the capacity to protect. And what is it known as? The defence industry. Where's the defending? The present tragedy does not cast extreme tourism in a positive light. Designed to see the 5 individuals alive and well does not signify approving of their foolhardy adventures. All too often, individuals with too much money, too much time in their hands, too little brains in their heads, and ugly, overweening hubris put their own and other people's lives at risk. New York City is still full of buildings that bear the names of Rockefeller and Carnegie. Those were the great emblems of that age. The 1980s, once again, we saw people exploring the skies, hot air balloon races, fast cars, land speed records. Always the pursuit of excellence is used to justify extreme wealth and disproportionate power, essentially inequality. But the fact that these ventures are starting to fail now suggests to me we're at a point where we need to examine our paradigm more heartily, more thoroughly. This is a time where we need to be diving down to the depths of our social models and seeing what fallen, sunk wreckages lie there that we are still allowing to define our time instead of moving boldly forward to new models. This summer, Virgin Galactic will finally start flying paying customers to the edge of space in the company's rocket-powered plane Spaceship Two. The first flight, a mission named Galactic 01, will launch as soon as June 27. Customers paid between 250 grand and 450 grand apiece. I do think that when on one part of the planet you have ludicrous, hubristic, explorative trips like that, and elsewhere there's just chaos and suffering and penury and poverty, it's telling us something. Don't you agree that it's somehow ridiculous that on one level we are all here on this planet, that we should be, through consensus and democracy, creating systems, ideals and goals that are a reflection of all of us, not just marked privilege and extreme elitism, that seems to be an indicator that something is very wrong. The question of class intrudes in both tragedies like a knife blade. Of the approximately 709 Titanic passengers in third or steerage class, an estimated 537 died.
Being poor is fantastic.
Dance with me, Jack.
Some 80% of male third-class passengers perished, while only 3% of first-class women suffered that fate. As has been well documented, steerage passengers on board the Titanic were confined to their area in the lower decks by grilled gates, some of which were never unlocked as the ship filled with water. If a culture collectively chooses a story as a metaphor, it means it has resonance in it. Why is everyone fascinated by the Titanic? Why? What is it telling us? There's information in there, not just rational materialistic data. How many people died? Did they drop a necklace down there? Let's find that thing that Leonardo DiCaprio dropped. Not just that, there's power in it somehow. There's something mesmeric and intriguing. And that kind of data helps you understand that. Because in the microcosm of the vessel itself, it shows you live in an unequal society. And in the event that even a ship sinks, you are not bonded by the fact that you're all on the same ship, because some lives are more valuable than others. So part of the energy behind this Titan submersive story is our awareness that these people were representatives of a particular economic class, and their pursuit to go fathoms deep in order to sort of go on a deep aquatic safari has led to death. Of course, that's really bad and really sad, and all lives are valuable, and I'm not the kind of person who gets off on death. You know what I mean? That's a weird trip. But what I will point out is that the story has a thread running through it that's trying to tell us something. Well, trying is not the right word. Can tell us something. 111 years later, class divisions have reached an even higher and more malignant stage. It has now become a tale, in fact, of two distinct vessels, the Titan on the one hand, and the fishing boat that sank on June 13th in the Mediterranean, killing hundreds of desperate refugees on the other. Now, I know a lot of you will say, refugees coming over here and all of that, and you're quite reluctant to take on board those kind of narratives. But my personal feeling is people that are willing to get on boats and risk their lives are frightened and desperate, and it's worth looking at the relative values of those lives. Which lives matter? Which lives are more important? How do you determine the value of a life? Why is it that some lives should have millions spent on saving them and supporting them and protecting them, not just in crisis, all the time? Systems are held up, subsidies are offered, tax breaks are given all the time. You notice it in a crisis because suddenly there's drama and allure and intrigue and a little maelstrom of energy that's easy for us to observe because it seems to step out of the norm. But it's always happening. Whereas other lives, they shouldn't be trying to, why don't they get in their own country? Why should I pay taxes? And I hear all of those arguments, and totally I'm sympathetic to those arguments. But just ask yourself why that is allowed to happen, and what are you being shown by this? Let me know in the comments, because I'm here to learn as well. Their mass flight has largely been precipitated by the imperialist wars and other operations carried out by Western powers, the very regimes now presiding over their deaths at sea. If your own government's actions have somehow precipitated a refugee crisis, either through war in order to pursue resources or some other political action in those territories, then when does the point come where we start to recognise, hang on a minute, we've got more in common with the people fleeing those nations than we do that thin, slender thread of elite interests that are causing those wars? Isn't it a necessity, you tell me, for us to all come together in sympathy and compassion and recognise that whilst it's not fair that some of our taxes is spent on helping and feeding displaced people, it's even less fair that the majority of our taxes go to elite interests like the military-industrial complex, subsidies offered to big energy firms, subsidies offered to big agri, subsidies offered to big food. It's just a question I'm asking you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Can you see what I'm trying to say? We know that these kind of extreme tourist trips are enjoyed by a particular class of people. Now, is it that they earned that money in the hustle-bustle, social Darwinism, concrete jungle of capitalism, free market competition? Or are there other rules that are less obvious to observe that we maybe have to go a little deeper and investigate in our own little submarine? Amazon, a $1 trillion company, has received at least $5 billion in US-based tax breaks and other subsidies. So that's Amazon. You know, Jeff Bezos is not the CEO anymore, but he was for a long time. And you might recall that Bezos built that super yacht that they had to take a bridge down somewhere in Europe in order to get it out. Bezos took his cock rocket out into into space, didn't he? Do you see now? $5 billion in tax breaks, cock rocket expeditions. I know that there is more complexity than that, but those things I've said are all true. Offering tax breaks and incentives to attract business is common practice for state and city governments. Politicians want thriving local economies and jobs for their communities. In the US, these kind of subsidies amount to at least $30 billion annually. But recent research from Princeton didn't find strong evidence that company-specific tax incentives increase broader economic growth. So that's the myth. These tax breaks will trickle down to everybody. Do they trickle down to everybody? Does everybody end up going on subaquatic explorations? Or are these kind of elite tourist pursuits only accessible, like elite tax breaks, to a very small group of people? Are we seeing that some lives are more valuable than others? Are we seeing that there is indeed something at depth that is trying to tell us something? Watch out. Watch out for hubris. Watch out for elitism. Watch out for a system that doesn't acknowledge the fact that while we're all on the same vessel, some people are in steerage and others are in first class. And it makes a big, big difference if the ship should ever go down. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments below? If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Remember, my special Brandemic is available now. It's a right laugh. It's self-funded. It's uncensored. There's a link in the description. We're on Rumble every single day. In the meantime, stay free.